7:30 p.m. We have 3 items on the agenda. I'll entertain a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Before we begin, I'm just going to put it out there. The whole spirit of these meetings is to share information, have a dialogue. That's what makes governance so good. Staff, we hope you continue to do that. We were disappointed that somehow, some way, by having a candid conversation about all the facts around fireworks turned to a press release and we're shutting down fireworks. I said, and that's unfortunate. That shouldn't have happened. We apologize to you for that. But please, please, please still be as open with us as you can. That's what transparent government is about. So with that, we're going to turn this over to Kurt White, Downtown Development Manager, proposed updates to the Town of Waxhaw Code of Ordinances.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor, Commissioners. So yes, we are going to go over the proposed updates to the Waxhaw Code of Ordinances, and I appreciate the feedback that I received from several of you. It's very helpful in kind of thinking through this. To the Mayor's point, these are proposed updates, and so we'll definitely entertain all the comments and feedback, and hopefully we can have a good discussion. Did want to just start briefly though with an overview and of the Code Enforcement Division's responsibilities as kind of a refresher to say how we got here, and then also it could be helpful just as to put some context around the proposals that we're going to be talking about. So today we're going to talk specifically about a community preservation ordinance and a mobile food units in the right-of-way ordinance. And a little bit of history of the Code Enforcement Division. It was since 2010. We were doing a lot of proactive enforcement. Kind of had to scale that back when during some of the boom times, basically, with need for building inspections. And then in the past couple years, we've reinvigorated the division with the creation of an actual dedicated division for specific code enforcement issues. And it was a strategic initiative back in 2016 to look at our current town code of ordinances and to revitalize them, to consolidate them into what we would call a community development ordinance, so that it'll be more understandable for the citizens and more straightforward from an enforcement standpoint. And so Lori Oakley, who previously worked in the code enforcement administrator position, kicked this off last May, actually, or May of 16, and we were able to pick up where she left off. So the Code Enforcement Division mission, what is it? The whole point is to protect the health and the safety, the welfare of the citizens of Waxhaw. What that looks like, it looks like property, quality of life issues on properties. So your things like your nuisances, your housing code issues, and also your enforcement of things like high grass and junk vehicles and things like that. So anything that contributes to or threatens the downgrading of property values, we really want to, is where Code Enforcement Division gets involved. Specifically, as I said, the quality of life issues are in the Town Code of Ordinances. Code Enforcement Division also does zoning enforcement in the UDO. The best example of that is our sign ordinance, and then also some property use issues. For example, you see a picture of a commercial storage unit there on a residential property. Again, just some of the things that code enforcement looks at. I want to try to run through these so we can get to the meat of the presentation today. But this is the minimum housing code. This is a house here actually in Waxhaw that we're working on on bringing into some compliance right now, junk motor vehicle. And it makes a big impact. And really, I have to give the credit here to Larry Pantori here, the town's code enforcement inspector, because this 693 resolutions this year, that's been him. He's out there just proactively going through town and making sure that he addresses everything from high grass, You see 293 cases of that, 189 illegal signs, work without permits, 22 of those, and that's a big deal. That's definitely a life safety issue in many cases. So definitely want to give credit to Larry for that, and an excellent percentage of resolutions. So Code Enforcement Division really does have an impact. That's just another way of looking at it. You see high grass tends to be the most common thing, especially in the spring and summer. That's that 41% of cases. Code enforcement's been increasing its work too in the past year since Larry came on. You see here 2016 case totals versus month to month in 2017. Every month's been higher. And resolutions have also been higher. So more cases, more resolutions in the past year, which I think has been a good thing for the town. Our process, basically the town receives a complaint or something is observed by the code enforcement inspector. The site's inspected. We always make an effort to first speak to the property owner. So when we talk about the proposed ordinances here in a minute, keep in mind that we're not just going out there and smacking someone with a fine as soon as a violation is found. So some engagement happens, a formal letter goes out if necessary, and if we're unable to get resolution through that formal notice, then there are options for civil citations or even the town abating violations. Best example of that is the town will cut the grass of a property that might not be in compliance. So this is just where it falls under the board's strategic initiatives under the providing consistent core infrastructure and services. So why is there a need for an update? I've touched on it a little bit, but first of all, the code enforcement regulations that I just ran through are scattered all over the current town code. This is from our website. We have it in chapter 71, 2, 3, 95. It's all over the place, and that makes it unclear to citizens when they're trying to figure out how to be in compliance with town codes, that it's hard to find things. It's also can be challenging for staff to make sure we're not overlooking things that might not be mentioned in this particular section we're looking at. There's also some of the tools we have to address issues aren't as effective as they could be. Junk motor vehicles is a big one, for example. Right now, we don't really have an expedient way to tow vehicles that are in violation on private property. Commercial vehicles is another one. The definitions are really hazy, so it can be difficult to, when you have a large commercial vehicle or here's a smaller, medium-sized box truck, it's harder to enforce those kind of things. There's loopholes in our housing ordinance right now that really would allow you to board up a structure indefinitely and never have to repair it. So there's just a lack of tools to address some of these issues. Other things that we have a lack of tools for, graffiti. It's not really a huge issue in Waxhaw, but it can come up definitely in parks. It can come up in some of our neighborhoods as well. We are missing some tools to handle RVs, trailers, boats, and even smoke and carbon monoxide detectors within homes, which is part of the minimum housing ordinance. So the first ordinance that I talked about, and again, we're going to look at community preservation ordinance and mobile food units in the right-of-way ordinance. The first thing we would do is create a new section in the code called the community preservation ordinance. It would add regulations along with these things you see here bulleted, and it would also provide some improved tools for them as well. It would put them all into the same chapter. For example, it would be a chapter 8. In the previous slide, or one of the previous slides that you saw with scattered all over the ordinance, it would be consolidated into one chapter, so very easy to use. So these are some of the things that we would be adding some regulations on. Parking would be a part of that as well. We would move some of the parking sections of the existing code into the community preservation ordinance, and we'd also add a couple. Staff would recommend adding a few things. One, to deal with overnight parking of medium and large vehicles and trailers in the downtown MS district. And we would ask the board to consider some time-limited parking spots for downtown as well, which came out of the parking study. It was a parking study recommendation from 2016. Perhaps we'll just go through the rest and then we'll have plenty of time for discussion. The second ordinance is the mobile food trucks in the right-of-way. Why? Why is this something that needs to be taken a look at? Well, lately there have been more food trucks have an interest in locating in Waxhaw, and especially as we get more density downtown, with both with the business environment and from a residential side. And currently we don't really have a way, or actually we don't have a way to really regulate them. So you could have a food truck park in a parking space downtown and really stay there indefinitely. And there's not really a way to handle that, both from a location standpoint, just proximity to other businesses, hours of operation, taking up a parking space. There's not really a way to handle that right now. So we looked at research from other towns around the country. We also looked at a National League of Cities report on food trucks, and found that nationwide there's three general ways that food trucks are handled, three parameters that are addressed in food truck in the right-of-way ordinances. First of all is time constraints, so how long can they stay in the same place? How far do they have to be from restaurants and other uses, so it's proximity. And then the third one is how we treat them differently in different parts of town. For example, downtown is often treated, central business districts are often treated differently than the rest of municipalities. There's also different prohibitions for things like when there's events, if it might conflict with that. So we also talked with the Main Street Advisory Board as well. There's two members on the Main Street Advisory Board who are actually either restaurant or eating and drinking establishment owners downtown, so we had some feedback from them. And what Waxhaw's proposed ordinance would do, I would want to clarify this is food trucks in the right-of-way. So this is not on private property. This is not the food truck at the Lowe's that you see. Those kind of changes would be proposed in the UDO rewrite, because that's dealing with private parcels. This is specifically here talking about in the public way. So for example, in a parking space downtown. What Waxhaw would do, or proposed ordinance would do, it would put a time constraint. It would say no more than 6 months in the same location, and they have to leave the right-of-way at night. So that means you couldn't just essentially set up a restaurant in a parking space for indefinitely. We would permit, this will go through a permitting process, which is how we would regulate this. They would have to be 100 feet away from restaurants, as measured on the sidewalk, and they would have to have adjacent property owner consent. They would be restricted during town events, so this would not override the town events policy on food trucks. We would just not allow them to operate during an event.
Property owner or tenant?
Adjacent, that's a good question. I believe it's worded as owner. I would have to take a look at that.
Okay.
And then this would also, they would not be allowed on Highway 75. They would not be allowed on state-maintained roads, because we would not be, the state actually they do have an ordinance that would handle what happens in their right-of-way with regard to food trucks. They have a vending ordinance already that we checked on. So really, you're talking about town-maintained street right-of-way. So in summary, what these proposed revisions would do, it would add a lot of clarity, both to citizens and staff. It would enhance some of our ability to enforce existing things, and it would, by creating some new regulations, it would give us, it would position us to proactively enforce some things that we see coming along, that we see the town could potentially be facing soon. So that is all, and you all should have a breakdown of the summary of changes that goes into the specifics about each one of those bulleted items. And I do want to let you know that with the feedback that I did receive, I've made a note of some of the feedback we received in the meetings earlier.
When you're talking about the 100 feet, are you talking about from a business or any adjacent Would that be a private home that they would need permission?
Sure, I think so it's, right now, the draft we have says 100 feet away from restaurants. Specifically, in the thought behind that was that it's the restaurants whose interests would most immediately come into conflict with the food trucks' interest. And so we're trying to balance that by finding some distance there.
Okay, just to put that out there, there are houses, private residences downtown where food trucks could be allowed for up to 6 months, right? Under the way it's written.
The way it's written now, so the adjacent property owner would still have to give consent. So there could be a situation where a food truck would be next door to a house that didn't give consent, the way it's written right now.
Well, next door, but not across the street.
It could be, the way we wrote it, it could be across the street, and that's something that, I believe we talked a little bit earlier about that, so there's different things we can do with that proximity.
I'm not real comfortable with, some folks that live downtown that could have a food truck sitting in front of their house for 6 months from, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m.?
It would be, I believe it's 10 a.m. to 12 a.m. They have to leave at night. They wouldn't stay there overnight. They have to leave every night. I know are there other thoughts about, food trucks? Should they be restricted to only certain parts of downtown? Do we want them at all? I mean, these are all questions.
Could restrict them to certain streets.
Restrict them to certain streets?
Yeah, because there's very little that you can actually park. I'm sorry, let me speak into the mic. There's very little that you would be 100 feet away from a restaurant in downtown. It's very minimal.
Mhm.
You couldn't really have one near the Dunkin' McDonald house because it's too close to the new Irish pub. You couldn't have one on McDonald Street because that's too close to the Irish pub. You could have one on Church Street, but it would have to be closer to the old planning department because you have to have spacing. You could have one on Price Street, but I don't know if you would want one on Price Street because it's not in downtown. You could have one on Howie Mine Road because there's no restaurants on that side of the road. You could have one on North Main Street, Northeast Main Street, East North Main Street, because there's no restaurants on that side of the track because it's more than 100 feet to Maxwell's. See what I'm saying? It's very limited.
It is limited, and that was done in conversations with the Main Street Board and some of the restaurants who have been asked downtown. The intent was to not let food trucks substitute for our downtown eating and drinking establishments. I will say it's 100 feet as measured on the sidewalk, which is a lot shorter than you would think.
How about for a bird's eye, because from block to block?
So the way it's written right now, it would look at, let's give an example. If you put one, if there was a food truck beside the bike depot but on North Church Street, that would be more than 100 feet along the sidewalk from the new Irish pub. If there was one on North Providence Street, that would be more than 100 feet from the Black Chicken. So there are places that, with this, the way it's written, they could go.
But would we want one on North Providence Street? Would we want one on Price Street?
Right.
I don't, you're restricting it so that they're going to fall into local neighborhoods, not into the commercial center of downtown. You understand what I'm saying? And if I lived on Price Street or North Providence, I really wouldn't want a food truck in my front yard or in my side yard or even on the street, because North Providence is a pretty nice neighborhood. I wouldn't want to have on Price Street. I know there's commercial stuff there, but it's not food, it's not in the same category of.
Right.
It's more residential. I think you should actually restrict it to certain streets and certain locations, period. I'm sorry. Let me turn this off. I think that we need to actually restrict the spots. Just have certain spots. Spot A, B, C, and D. After you get out the, fill them up, that's, sorry, there's no more spots left in town. You
Okay.
know, they can't come on North Main Street because that's a state road still.
Yep.
And they can't go on Rehoboth Road because that's a state road.
That's, yeah, they wouldn't be able to, that's correct.
You know, they could go on South Providence, but do we want one on South Providence? And, you know, I don't know. They could go on South Broome Street if they're far enough back, but do we want one there? We could have one in Arbor Street, across from the cemetery.
Yes, it's applicable. Is there any type of restrictions as far as topography, or, you know, is it paved or unpaved? I mean, you pull over in a ditch and it's a hazard to the people going there. Is there gonna be anything like that in there?
There's nothing that specifically mentions topography. The language does say that the Development Services Director can deny a permit if it's conflicts with the town's objectives or safety. It's still discretionary.
Right.
But nothing specifically that mentions topography.
I mean, but they could be on a gravel lot, or they could be on a paved area.
Yes.
We don't want them pulling over on the grass.
Right. Right.
I understand what you're doing here to protect the restaurants, but I would think that any food truck parked outside, I don't have a problem with it at the events. I mean, people expect that they come
Right.
there. But any food truck with your permitting for 6 months from 10 to 12 midnight, up to 6 months to park in that same space, if it were in front of a house or 100 feet from a restaurant, is any food truck with that amount of time is going to take away from restaurants downtown. I think it would. If I had a restaurant, I would probably say, wait a minute, you've got a permit for a food truck for 6 months sitting 100 feet away from my restaurant. I don't know how the restaurant owners feel, but, you know, it's just
Sure.
thought.
Mm-hmm.
So, question.
Yes.
I can't tell by reading it, but are these prohibited in residential areas? Food trucks?
Not how it's currently drafted.
So, to Commissioner Fitzgerald's point, I don't know how you limit it by streets. Because we're approaching a town of 18,000, you got streets everywhere.
Yeah, that'd be,
I mean, I don't know how you start to limit that way. To Commissioner Burns' point, you are almost establishing a temporary restaurant. I mean, that's, and for 6 months. And is that something we want? I mean, I don't have a feel one way or the other as to how that is done in other cities or towns or whatever.
right. So in most other cities and towns, this is exactly what they do. They do a proximity from restaurants to try to balance those two issues. The restaurant's desires, and it's not, I would say you really have three different interests going. You have the restaurant owners, you have food truck owners, and then you have those establishments that don't serve food. And many times they do want to have that for their customers, a food truck, but yeah, it's definitely an issue that comes up. I mean, it's probably the biggest complaint you'll hear is regarding the proximity to restaurants.
Is there a way that you can, rather than say where they can't be, then have a list of streets that can be?
Yeah.
that don't interfere with restaurants or in front of someone's house.
Sure, and that could be drafted that way.
And another question is, 6 month permit, at the end of that 6 months, can that same truck re-permit for another 6 months?
Not in the same location,
But another,
but they could, yes, they could keep staying in town or in the district.
How long do they have to wait
Um,
before they can reapply for the same location?
I'd have to check that. But
Yeah, that's fine.
I'll have to check back.
The other thing, and I would encourage you to select one or the other, or clarify this, but written authorization from the abutting property owner / business owner.
Okay.
Is it one or the other, or both, or just, let's be clear on that.
So what I'm,
And what if you're talking about 100 feet from a restaurant by sidewalk? What if you don't have sidewalk? So where does that fall? For instance, you could have one in Curitan Sound Center on Kensington in the abandoned parking spaces we don't have anymore. That's 100 feet away from Moe's. That would be more than 100 feet away from Moe's, but there's no sidewalk in that area, so I don't know where that is.
Yep.
That is
good question.
That is on town property. But I don't know is that what you're considering? We have to figure it out, every eligible use for it is what I'm thinking. And I saw most of a vision of using food trucks in the downtown area, but like you said, there's one in the Lowe's parking lot every day. There's one in the Goodwill parking lot outside of the town limits almost every day.
Yeah, we thought about at first just doing downtown, but then we were thinking, perhaps we should go ahead and try to be proactive, because you never know what may happen in the neighborhoods, and we thought we should get something to handle that as well. But am I hearing that?
What if they wanted to put one in Curitan residential where the streets are so narrow? You can't even hardly get a fire truck down there through there now.
Yeah.
And you put a food truck in there, I don't know.
Right, and there is the provision in the current draft that deals with the safety of the location, because the town still has to approve the permit. It's not just a blanket permission throughout the whole town.
We got to be very careful on our verbiage, though, because it would end up saying that we're prejudiced and we're not allowing those people to do their business in a spot where they think they're going to do a lot of money, and they could actually bring a lawyer in this scenario. I just think we really need to be. You have this spot A, B, C, and D, and that's it. I'm sorry, once they're filled up, I'm sorry, we don't have any more spots.
So, is the consensus we need to revisit, look at a way to limit them to commercial areas, maybe designate where they can go instead of where they can't, and look at the time limit? Is that?
yeah, I think 6 months is a long time. I mean, that's a temporary, almost temporary permanent, because they can come back and re-permit and go to one spot over when you designate where they can be. And I'm wondering how many places or spots that will there be when you finally determine how many places that can be. Will that be 20 or 25? And I don't see that happening, but in the future it could, between 11 and 12 at night every day, to have 20 food trucks sitting around town. Is that really how we want downtown to look? Personally, I wouldn't.
The other question is, if you allow them for 6 months and they go to a different location 6 months, can they go back to the first location or to the third location? Is there a time limit on how many times that they can rent or have permitted space in the downtown area or wherever in the town? That's, because what would happen if you had, let's say, 5 spaces, let's say they all filled up, they would just rotate around. They would go from, it would be a permanent location. It's basically just,
I believe that you're probably not gonna, if you actually give them spaces, we designate the amount where there will be spaces, there are not gonna be that many when you think about it, other than the downtown district that's commercial. You go outside of downtown and everything's a state highway except for private property, and they can go on private property at all the shopping centers, whatever. And then you limit it as to what is not, you say, Providence Street, or I guess it's not South Providence, it's south of the thing down there. There's no place you can park there. It's a regular, there's too much traffic. It may be, it's not appropriate. People will be getting in the street in order to operate the truck. It's going to have to be a very low traffic area. And how many are there? 5, 10 at the most, in my opinion.
not even that.
Seems like you had something in here, I can't find it right now, where the determination would be if it was a safety factor. I think you have that in there.
Yes, I'd have to find the exact words. It says it's in number, it's it's number 10, so I guess it's 110.10. For the vendors, if the vendor's use of the permit adversely affects the public's health, safety, or welfare. Development Services Director or his or her designee can make that determination and then deny or suspend a permit.
So that would kind of fall into what Commissioner Warner was
Right.
saying, if it's not a safe place to pull off or where cars don't have a place to park and they stop.
Yes.
Okay.
Any other?
Where do the traveling ice cream trucks fall? Are they a food truck?
We would have to look at that. We do have a peddler's ordinance, which perhaps they may fall under.
Well, they go through all the neighborhoods. That's
Right.
why I'm asking.
Is there anything else on food
That
trucks?
clear as mud for you?
Very clear.
Okay.
No, well, I think I heard.
I think what you're hearing is a focus on downtown, but let's be precise.
Focus on downtown, time limits, perhaps designated spots. Answer the question about can they go back to the same spot, proximity to other food trucks maybe, so that I think Commissioner Burns mentioned the clumping of 10 or 20. Okay. Was there anything on some of the other sections? I know I've heard some conversation about rollout containers, parking on lawns. Some of the comments I heard, or when just individual conversations.
Will you get input individually from each of us, or in
Yeah.
essence?
Right.
Okay, and then you're going to consolidate that and bring it back, or what?
Well,
I don't think we all collectively have seen what that impact is,
so,
just to be fair.
yep,
I mean,
oh, absolutely. Yeah, we can consolidate the feedback, maybe with red line changes. And then
Just
have
curious
everyone
how
look
you're
at it.
gonna
Yeah.
do it, that's all.
I wasn't sure to what level of detail we would go into it at this discussion, so.
How far do you want us to go right now?
Well,
We'll follow your lead.
we could go. So the biggest, we could look at some of the common questions that I received from the individual feedback. I think that could be helpful. One of them was the rollout containers. So for the trash containers, the proposal in the ordinance was to require that they are placed at the curb no earlier than the day before collection day and removed by midnight on collection day. And I know I received several comments just that kind of wondering whether that was too strict, or if that was an appropriate regulations. Some suggested changes, maybe allowing it till noon the next day instead of midnight. That was one of them that came up kind of consistently.
That was my feeling, to be truth with you, that it's too restrictive. If I wanted to live in the HOA, I would live in the HOA. I don't live in the HOA because of that. I don't want them to tell me what to do. I think people have property rights, you know, and if they want to bring their garbage can out and leave it overnight and pick it up the next morning, I think that's reasonable, you know, within reason. But, you know, the garbage can, you know, really, our ordinance officer wouldn't be working on the weekends anyway, so he wouldn't find the garbage can until Monday. If the can is not in by Monday, there's something wrong there. There's somebody either sick inside the house and couldn't get out and get that garbage can in, or their neighbors need to help them out. Just be truthful with you. My opinion.
Don't forget, we may not always have collection on Friday.
Right.
Yeah, I know, but at this point, I mean, Friday, you know, if you,
In code enforcement, I mean, we can do enforcement on the weekends. I mean, that's,
yeah, I know, but then it's kind of costly too, because then you don't have them here during the weekdays. I mean, because how many code enforcement officers we have is one. You know, I would think it'd be more important having them here during business hours rather than other times.
Has there been an issue with garbage cans? I know when we discussed it, it was more in the business district, correct? Where they were staying out. As far as the residential, I'm around town all the time. I've never seen an issue with trash cans staying at the street for more than a couple of days. I mean, most people, I don't think I've seen maybe one or two times around when people pull it back up to their house because they're going to put the garbage in it. They don't walk to the street to do it. I think it's a moot point to even bother to do that for neighborhoods.
for the business district, it definitely, we have seen that can be an issue, for downtown, when I say business district.
But
With the,
do the businesses get pickup from us? No. So,
well, we would regulate rollout containers in general. I mean, it would be, whoever your collection is, it's still a rollout container that's out there.
I'm going to tell you the biggest problem I have is not with me taking it out or in, it's the people leaving them in the middle of the street. When my neighbor across the street and there's a little alley between the garbage cans that are sitting on the street. I mean, they don't always put them off the curb. I mean,
That's the garbage collector.
that's the
They
collector
leave 'em
himself.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I've sat in it at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I say, why is everybody stopping in front of my house? Because the garbage cans are in the street.
Yeah, I think we're looking at the
That's,
something that we should be looking at a different area is talking to the collectors to put the garbage cans back in, because like I said, I've never seen a problem in neighborhoods, even the smaller ones to the larger ones that leave their garbage cans out. I don't think it's a problem. Business district, I've never seen it, but, you know, I take it that it happens, and maybe that could be handled on a one-on-one basis, is just send them a letter or something and say, could you bring them back in? But making it in an ordinance where, I don't know, we're not in an HOA downtown, and we don't want to be.
the question I have is really faced to Jim. That your ditch is on the road. I mean, you have a culvert for your driveway, and you really don't have any planting area between the street and the ditch. So where do you put your garbage can, in your driveway? I mean, there is those houses all through town. It's not all subdivisions that have curb and gutter. We have a lot of houses just have ditch and street. And that's the problem. We have so many different varieties of homes and residences that you have to make it uniform for all. If you have, particular down in that area where Jim lives, the ditches are right on the street. I mean, there's not a foot, there's not even 6 inches. You have to put your garbage can in the street to have it serviced, or in your driveway, if you have a driveway. Some of them don't even have driveways. Some of them just have a grass path that they drove on, or had gravel there at one time and it's grown over.
Which brings to the other thing that's in here about parking in the driveway.
Yeah, I know. We have to make it uniform for everybody. It's not possible, some of them, to put 2 foot to 3 foot off the road, because there isn't, that'd be in the ditch.
Typically,
No,
people in my neighborhood that do have deep ditches, mine aren't that deep.
Yeah,
They do it in the driveway. I mean, they just have to drive around them.
I just don't know how to put my
Okay.
hands around that. I don't know, like, now that I think about it.
Sure.
I would never guess in a million years that we were providing jurisdiction on businesses with the way this is written. This whole garbage thing is written to the residential side of it. Businesses enter into private contracts. So I don't know how we would enforce anything because we wouldn't know what those contracts are. They could be different days, different whatever. So I don't want to arbitrarily assume that we're regulating the business side of it, and we don't really have this all coalesced from a business side. So
Yeah, we can take a look at that.
yeah, let's make sure we look into that.
Sure.
The other part of that is, some of these things are in here, given that it's written to residential, I wouldn't have a clue as a resident, you're putting a burden on me. I don't know how many pounds of garbage I put in the garbage can. I mean, those kind of things are sitting there going like, I would, it's almost like we're making a moot point on some things like that. I mean,
Okay.
They give us a container, we fill it up. If you want to get to the point where if you go beyond the container, that stuff that makes much more sense to me than putting weight limits, because a lot of them, in many neighborhoods, they use the arm, so they don't care.
Right.
So just some consistency on that stuff, because I'd probably be the one that'd get fined for a weight limit at some point in time, and, I don't know I wouldn't have a clue as to how to measure it. The only other thing is that I was a little bit nervous about is, we own the contract with the vendor. And I'm a little bit uncomfortable saying that a private party contractor with the towns determines the schedule. At least they should determine in conjunction with the town manager or public services or whatever. It's on 8101-2. If they came out and all of a sudden said, we're going to pick up on Sunday, the way this is written, they could do it. That's an extreme. But somewhere, I think we should put in conjunction with the town. else you want to dig into?
I probably shouldn't say this, but I was reading the trailer ordinance, and I am in violation now. I have 3 trailers. I mean, I have an acre of property. I mean, the ones, they're well hidden behind my garage, and nobody knows they're there. But I have 2, basically I have a utility trailer, and I have one I keep my kayaks on. I actually have a third one that's a boat trailer, which it's a project trailer. Doesn't have a license on it at the time. But, I mean, I can see that on a small lot where it's gonna be very obvious. I mean, I do have an acre of property, and they're fairly well hidden. I don't know the answer to that, I'm just telling you.
Yeah, you're just bringing, yeah, that's, we try to deal with recreational vehicles, trailers, boats, commercial vehicles, and we try to just clean it up and make it more cut and dry, because right now, well, there's really nothing to enforce the RVs and some of the recreational vehicles. Commercial vehicles, it's not clear in the current ordinance what is a vehicle, what is a commercial vehicle, how big it can be. Trailers, yeah, so there's definitely a lot that was done
Is
around.
a commercial vehicle a pickup truck with graphics on the side of the business?
So the reason, what we did was we set up 3 different types of commercial vehicles, a light, medium, and a heavy. And they're permitted in different areas depending on which one of those categories they fall in. If there's been no actual modification to the factory-made body, then it's not a commercial vehicle. So putting a decal on it doesn't make it commercial. If you get to the point where you're putting a ladder rack on it, then that could trigger it to become a light commercial vehicle. But those are still permitted in residential. What starts happening, though, when you get to a certain height, length, or weight, you cross into a medium and large vehicles, and then those are handled differently.
So what's the reasoning behind not wanting commercial vehicles if someone lives there or if they have their business and they're parked on the street?
Yeah, so it's really to protect the neighborhood, protect the aesthetics and the property values, and even the streets themselves. That is from a wear issue. If you look at the definitions of what those are,
Well, the reason I'm asking is we're looking at this for aesthetics and wear, and then on the flip side, we're just saying that we want to allow food trucks for 6 months at a time all over downtown, up to how many ever spots you get. I think that might be off a little bit. If we're looking at it for that reason. I mean, there's a difference in someone having a business, I think, and parking their pickup truck with their signage on it or with a van, and that's their livelihood, rather than allowing outside entities coming in to park for 6 months at a time with a food truck sitting in front of businesses, restaurants, or homes.
yeah.
It seems
So to clarify, right, this would not prohibit people taking their work vehicles home. It would set a limit as to what kind of vehicle. So light commercial vehicles, pickup trucks, up to 13,000 pounds of cargo, not prohibited. We're talking about big box trucks that are 14 feet tall. We're talking about tractor trailers. We're talking about 14-foot long work platforms for like a tow truck kind of thing. Those are what we're talking about keeping out of residential, not your contractor has a pickup truck and a lawn trailer necessarily.
I can assure you that over in Hillcrest, there was somebody was bringing his tractor home, his tractor trailer home on the weekends or whatever, and he really ripped up the ditch. I mean, it would go in the ditch and
Right.
there's big gouges. They do a lot of destruction. And honestly, in Union County, you're not allowed to have a tractor trailer in a residential neighborhood. That's why you see them parked up in the backside of Lowe's on the weekends, because that's where they park them.
Yeah, this draft would prohibit large commercial vehicles, tractor trailers included, from all residential districts. Medium commercial vehicles would still be allowed even in residential as long as they were parked in a driveway. So it keeps them off the road so you don't have a big box truck or a tow truck parked along the side of a street.
So a box truck can be parked in their driveway? The
If it-
driveway that they own?
If it were less than 14 feet long, and
Less than 14 feet long? The whole
the
truck?
work area, the box,
The box itself?
yeah.
Because the truck's probably 21 feet long.
This is the work area, yeah.
A low boy is, that's, the car's 20 feet long, so a low boy's bigger than that, so that type of thing.
Good rule of thumb is, are you blocking the sidewalk?
Yes, and that's
And that's,
another addition to this,
Yeah.
this ordinance that's currently not in there. It says you can't obstruct a street in our current ordinance, but it doesn't have public sidewalk, so we've added public sidewalk to that. Right. Parking is another thing I thought would be good in the full group here, because it would be new to actually regulate parking, specifically in the downtown, both from a time limit perspective and from an overnight perspective. The two changes that were being proposed for downtown would be to allow the board to designate time-limited parking in certain spaces downtown. So 2-hour time limit, for example, could be a 15-minute time limit to facilitate to-go orders for a restaurant, or there's a variety of things you can do with it. I'm not proposing the specifics. I'm just proposing that we put it in the ordinance to allow that discretion, because right now we don't have that. And the second one was overnight parking downtown by commercial vehicles.
I support that wholeheartedly, because there's commercial vehicles there that don't ever move in the downtown area. And there's owners' vehicles that park right in front of their business that don't ever move during business hours. So therefore, they take up a customer's parking spot. As a business owner and worked at a chain store, I think that's terrible. The customers always come first. They've lost track of their psyche. I think that we need to force them to put time limits on all spots in the downtown. I think 2 to 4 hours is a reasonable amount of time. You can go down and shop, you can do your dinner or whatever in 2 to 4 hours or whatever. We need to figure out which that is, but I think we should have time limits. That way, people won't be complaining, well, I never can find a spot. Well, that's because the spots where you're looking are not in front of the shop you're looking for. We know that. We have enough spots, but they're not in the spot where they want to walk. They don't want to walk. Well,
Right. And to that point, when you say we know that this recommendation comes from the parking study that we did about 1.5 years ago.
so you're putting the structure in place.
That's right. I'm just putting the structure in place. It shall be effective when signs giving notice have been erected. So, not saying where it's going to be, but at least putting it in place.
So how are you gonna monitor that? You're gonna have someone down there watching every parking space for a 2-hour time limit?
Yes, and so that's a great question. Enforcement is a big piece of this. We've talked to the police department, and we don't have that defined yet how we will actually go about enforcing it. Again, it's just putting the structure in place.
So Commissioner Fitzgerald touched on it. Of this board of 6, only 2 of us, or 2 people, live in HOA neighborhoods. The other 4 of us do not. I'm sure when you and Fred moved into your neighborhoods, you were given the rules, given the regulations, you develop them through the community and the HOA board if something changes, correct?
Good theory. Very good theory.
By definition, that's the way it's set up, though. If there's a problem in your HOA, you take it to your HOA board.
No, your management company actually does the enforcement. HOA board is a policy-making board. The management company, much like a town staff, does the administrative part of it.
policymaking board based on the residents of your community. So to that point then, I think as we develop this, we should have input from the citizens of the community, which would essentially turn out to be the HOA at that point. Maybe a charrette, maybe a Saturday session, something to get their input. What do they, what are they looking for? Are they concerned with the rollout being set out all night long or a couple days in a row? Are they concerned with, what are they concerned with, and how does it build these ordinances?
I'm trying to envision a Saturday charrette talking about ordinances on garbage cans and parking. I'm not sure we'd get a lot of people. I think you can do it informally and just and go around and ask some people. I did that this past Sunday, and the biggest thing is provide clarity as to who's enforcing what. What's the responsibility of the HOA? What's the responsibility of the town? Because the perception is that the town always supersedes. But when you actually get into a situation, it's not always that case. So where is the black and white? That's the biggest thing. I think what you have in an HOA is you get used to the rules and you just abide by them because it's a community spirit, a much smaller community spirit. It's kind of like what Commissioner Burns said. You take care of your yard. You take care of it's just part of the pride of being in a community. So I think what you'll get into more than anything is the frustration. It tends to be on parking and recreational vehicles and parking on the street and making it a little less safe. But a lot of this other stuff, it would gloss over. At least that was the perception of the 8 people that were watching the Panthers game with me on Sunday as I asked this question. 'Cause I did. I mean, they were there, and what do you think? And we have an HOA board meeting coming up this week, and went down that route.
Did they all live in an HOA?
Yeah, it was our neighborhood, yeah. So, but it's confusing. Todd and I just had this conversation. We got a stop sign down. Well, it's a decorative pole. What do we do? Who rules what? So by default, if I hadn't seen it, nobody in the HOA would have called it because the assumption is we own the pole, so, now you got a safety issue. This is where we got to get some clarity on some of this stuff as to who does what, who owns what, personal opinion. I do have a question or a comment on the town parks. No overnight parking between the hours of 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. I think we're asking for trouble if we allow from 5 o'clock to 11 o'clock, people can be parking in a park and doing whatever they feel like doing 6 hours in the dark during the winter months. That's just a recipe for kids to go somewhere. No disrespect to kids, but
Yeah,
I personally believe it should be dusk to dawn.
Our parks are closed at night,
Yeah, but what they have here is 11 p.m. to 6 a.m.
but the park is closed, so how you get in the park?
Town Creek Park, you can drive in there anytime you want. Nesbitt Park, you can pretty much drive in there anytime you want.
There's always been that guy with the truck that's been parking overnight over Town Creek. I think he hasn't been there lately yet.
And so just for clarification purposes, that actually was not, that's in our current ordinance. This was not a new thing.
Yeah.
So if we wanted, I would have to talk to the Parks and Rec director and we could see how that should look.
I just think it's risky. Having seen some of that activity go on over at Town Creek Park.
Just to throw another question into that, if we limit the parking to 2 or 3 hours, now that would just be in the downtown district, not in the, say if the Thread Trail ever gets complete, I might go down there for 6 or 8 hours, take a walk.
It would be downtown.
Okay.
As long as you're gone by dusk.
Well, I mean, it's not the problem, it's the whole day.
Yeah. No,
I've
that's,
been known to walk 20 miles.
there's people that park there for lengths period of time to walk the trails. There's nothing wrong with that. Do you have enough for now? I'm just cognizant of the time. We got about a half hour to get
Right.
through two other items.
That's right. So I do have enough for now, and with the comments that I received directly from individuals, we can either send something out that consolidates that, or potentially look at a red line revision of the ordinance and let everyone take a look at that.
I'd suggest some red lines and then work off that next draft. Is
Okay.
probably the best way to do that.
That's great. Thank you for bringing
Yep.
this forward. And Larry, if you're quick enough, you can head over to where Commissioner Warner lives and see if he's in violation of that ordinance real quick.
Yeah,
My
thank
neighbor
you.
is too. Him and his 2 boats and his trailer and his little yard truck. So it's, we're the old timers. Was acceptable, but now we're becoming big city.
Thanks for everyone for
Thank
the
you
comments.
both. Next up, Todd, renewal of solid waste and recycling contract.
Mayor, Commissioners, I'm here tonight to talk about 2 things. One, our contract with RCS ran out June 30th. Me and Mr. Wood met with the owner, Joe Hudson, and discussed a few things with him. And then Warren left and Mr. Leonard, I think it was, came in, and he decided we should wait till Mr. Ferguson got here.
Mr. Barefoot? Yeah.
Yeah. And so we waited, and one of the things we talked about, every Friday, we have recycled bins, the little bins. It just blows trash. If the wind blows it all over the neighborhoods, all over the streets. And we discussed having the 96-gallon recycle bins. Well, to have those, the cost is $280,000. So Mr. Hudson, that owns RCS, offered to let us, he buys them, and we buy them back from him over a 5-year period at $1 per household per month, which brings it from $16.48 to $17.48. So that was a pretty good deal. Mr. Wood liked it, but then we thought, we would wait. And I guess the reason I'm here tonight is RCS has been doing our trash since 1998. When they started, there was 928 homes. Right now, we got 5,606. But this week, I got 5 more, so have 5,611 new homes. We average 2 or 3 a week now. Not only does RCS pick up our trash weekly without any complaints, hardly from anybody, he offers porta-johns for the parks. He offers garbage cans for Harvey Clay Park, Town Creek Park, porta-johns. He offers porta-johns for all the events. Like last week, we had 10 porta-johns and 5 wash stands at no charge. And I came in Saturday morning at 6 o'clock, and they were in here cleaning them out at no charge. They were back in here Sunday morning and cleaned them out for no charge. We get 3 garbage dumpsters. The police department gets one. We get one at Public Service, and Parks and Rec is now, they have a dumpster. That's at no charge. So I guess I'm here tonight to ask if we could let the town manager try to work up a contract, since we don't have one since June, for the next 5 years to include the recycle containers, 96-gallon containers. And if you got any questions? And I will talk to them about leaving the cans in the road.
So 96 gallons, is that the same size that we currently use?
Yes.
So we would have 2 then?
Yeah, but it'd be 2 different colors.
Okay.
Yeah, we gotta decide on the color for the recycle, if we get to it. And we get complaints every day, people want us, can we not get a big one? Some people go by their own at Lowe's, the little ones.
Yep.
Some houses got 3 or 4 little bins there. Joe leaves probably 25 or 30 there every week that we pass out.
And so it would come with instructions, like currently I separate glass, tin cans, whatever, and paper. It would come with instructions, all of it goes in the same?
All goes in one bin, it goes in one big
Oh,
recycle
okay.
factory, and they separate it up there.
Okay.
Are we gonna have recycles picked up every week then?
That'll be every 2 weeks. You divide the town, since you going with the bigger containers, you can get more in them, so he's gonna do it every 2 weeks. So it'd be one part, and he will send out a calendar when you will be picked up. It'd be like a refrigerator magnet calendar.
I would like to make a comment that I think they do a fantastic job. I fill up my garbage can quite full sometimes, and I put another garbage can out separately, and they still take both of them.
And they will pick up.
And they take the recycles, whether they're in a recycled container or not, because presently I have one recycled container. It's not big enough for even just my wife and I, because we recycle a lot of stuff. And we put it in a trash can, and we put it inside the recycled container, and they pick it all up, and they do a fantastic job.
They do 2 bulk pickups a year, and the only thing they charge is a tipping fee. They don't charge us for the fuel or anything that it takes to pick it up. They do white goods every week. If you got a refrigerator, stove, dishwasher, washing machine, dryer, they will pick that up. You just call public service, and we get them to let them know, and they pick it up when they drop off the can.
So what Public Service is recommending is same vendor,
Yes.
same level of service, except for recycling, which would be every 2 weeks, but with a larger container. But everything else, service-wise, would remain the same.
Right.
And that, and I think it's on the agenda for later this evening, and then authorize Greg Ferguson to negotiate the contract with them.
And if we do go with that, I think we discussed what, February?
Yep.
That we would try to start it up.
Yeah, potentially could do earlier than July 1st, so we would look at that from a financial standpoint, but we may have some flexibility to go ahead and implement it in the spring.
And that's why we kind of waited on the contract, to make sure that everything would work out right.
There's got to be some lead time for the purchase of the containers, but that's
Yeah.
really what drives it.
Other questions? Okay, thank you, Todd.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Ferguson, CIP update.
We have back before you tonight a work in progress, which is the capital improvement program. This is something we talked about at the retreat in August, and we're moving through the process of developing the CIP to hopefully be included in the next budget year as you look at adopting the budget. And so many of these projects, or most all these projects, are going to be familiar to you, but let me just walk through these and then just take some questions and get some feedback as needed. But this is, again, a draft. It's a work in progress. So if there's a project in a particular year, understand that could change based on things that drive schedule. So a project that might be 3 years out could move closer or it could move further out. And of course, dollar estimates are refined on an annual basis, so that would change over time as well. But from a capital planning standpoint, we need a working document that gives us a 5-year snapshot of what the town expects to spend from capital budget, and it starts to really get down into the details of how we pay for that, whether we pay for it as pay-as-you-go, which has been the main practice in the past. Those are projects that are smaller in duration and usually are completed within a budget year. We're now contemplating more projects that are multi-year, multi-fiscal year projects, and so they would first be in a capital plan or program, and then move into a capital project ordinance, which will allow multiple years. So going to the page 1, which you cannot see on the screen, but you do have some printouts, and we have information behind this. This is just kind of a summary page, but it gives a 1-page snapshot of each of the projects in a fiscal year. So there's a center column there where you see a lot of numbers. That's fiscal year 18, which is the year that we're currently in. Runs from July 1st through June 30. And so those projects that you see in FY18 relate back to the budget and are partially or fully funded in the budget for FY18. A note is that a project that starts in FY18 might not end in FY18. So these are the starting points, and the full amount on this particular chart is shown in the year that the project starts. But many of these projects might be multiple years with planning, land acquisition, right-of-way and utilities, construction. So that could be a multi-year process, could be 3 or 4 or 5 years. So going forward to the first project, we're not going to go through each project, but this is the project that Kurt's responsible for, Downtown TAP Grant Pedestrian Project. You'll see Part 1 again gives the overall cost. It's broken up into design and construction, and that makes up the total cost on Part A, which is a little bit over $1 million. Part B is a description and detail of funding sources. And so there's a column on the left-hand side that has the different types of funding sources, some of which we have not used before, one of which says future referendum, if that were to be an option. Currently, you see a federal transportation TAP grant being one of those funding sources. So Part B there is a funding source. In the bottom of the page, Part C really gets to operating impact. So over time, if we build infrastructure, if we build parks, what happens to maintain those parks, or what happens to maintain that infrastructure? So we're beginning to capture on Part C the operating costs over time. And so in this particular project, there's some costs there for personnel and there's some costs for other maintenance. And so as we talked about maintaining what we build, this is where you'd see that cost start to show up.
So are these fairly accurate on this one, or?
Yes. Now, so look, great question. Year number 1 of your capital program is the year that matters the most, because that's the year that has to relate back to your budget. So these numbers are good numbers, and so we'll walk through those and just kind of talk about those, and then kind of breeze through some of the out years, and then a couple notes on projects that we don't yet have numbers on. So TAP Grant is the first project there. Second project is the Bonds Grove Church Road. This is a project where we're working with DOT to hopefully have this as a spot safety project. However, it is close to the recently announced Highway 16 widening project in timing as far as a deliverable. So they have not acknowledged yet that they would be willing to do this project as spot safety. It's not funded otherwise. This is a project where we're planning to use developer funds. If you look at Part B there, those were revenues that were designated from the Millbridge project, and that would be applied toward the cost of this project, and then we'd have some out-of-pocket costs from the general fund next year, or in whatever year it gets actually started. So we would work to finalize that budget need. Next project, this project is a spot safety project that is moving along quickly. We're working on a letter requesting a memorandum of understanding with DOT. DOT has basically asked us to provide that so that we can both get some clarity as far as this project moving along. You'll notice that the construction number there is $85,000, and that's basically a traffic signal and a little bit longer lane on one or more of the approaches that was required. So not a large contribution, because the total project cost would be back closer to the amount for Bonds Grove Church Road. So you look at the total cost there, and you look at this particular cost. The state is paying the majority of this cost on this project. We could, and at some point may look at amending this sheet to show the state cost, but we don't have the state cost. We have more of a direct number for the town cost. So this is information we have right now on it. Another grant that's underway, the CDBG.
So on the Gray Byram, this is one where once you know what the state is, you could add under B other state contribution, and then it'd be reflective of the total.
Yeah, and there's different ways to show these type projects. This one, because it's a minor contribution from the town versus the major contribution from the state, philosophically we could show it either way. we just don't have the information from the state yet, so as soon as we get that, we can add it, and it gives a true cost picture. Because what we wouldn't want someone to think is that you can deliver a total intersection improvement for $85,000.
That's what I was getting at, yeah.
It'd be a lot closer to the $600,000 number.
Then the next question is, why can't you do that tomorrow? I mean,
Yes,
Right.
if it's only
if it's
85,000.
only 85,000, why can't you do it tomorrow?
This is a sidewalk project that is funded, and you'll notice the great thing about it is funded by others. So it's a community development block grant, and there's not a local match. So there may be some costs at the end of the project where there may be some things that we come back and say we want to do in addition to what's funded, but that's the project budget right now, and you'll notice there's some operating maintenance costs on the bottom box there over time. Sidewalk extension program. This is kind of I would call it a placeholder, but an acknowledgement that this year we've got $150,000 in right-of-way, and we've got to make a concerted effort to think about how we use those funds over time. So in year number one, maybe it's some design and some right-of-way, but then in year number three, you see us getting really more serious about construction. The first 2 years really are necessary, though, to get any project teed up. So to really spend a good amount of money in an out year, there has to be planning for it. So Dennis and I have talked about kind of an approach to this, and one approach would be potentially to get some of these sidewalks designed and start looking at the right-of-way impact, if there is right-of-way impact, so that we're teeing it up for future construction in a bigger manner. I mean, we could go out and do just a little sidewalk here and there for $150,000, but it's not going to be it's not going to be quick, number one, and it's kind of piecemeal if you're approaching it that way. So this is a larger planned investment over time. You'll see there's two suggested $500,000 construction years there in 20 and 23, and you'll also notice that it really calls for a new revenue source that we don't have right now, which in this particular example, we're saying a future referendum is a possibility. Other type of debt could be a possibility, but I think you're going to see when we get to the end of this, the numbers start adding up, and we're getting to a level, if we use this type of program, to consider a referendum as one of those tools.
And then sidewalk maintenance would just be in the operating budget side of it.
Correct.
When would we be able to know where the sidewalks are being placed? Because I get questions about sidewalks all the time.
We now have a sidewalk prioritization list that has ranking criteria and gives it the sidewalk a score. That exists already, and we can share that, get that out to you, but that gives kind of a ranking order. That being said, there may be some factors that come into play that would adjust that order a little bit, and this is something that Dennis and I have not really fully discussed, but with Highway 16 being now funded and some timing on it, there may be some sidewalk that was ranked very high because of the usage that we'd want to delay and let that project get designed a little bit further before we jumped into that, because our design and our location might be in conflict with what happens ultimately, but that would be something that could be coordinated, particularly if we're talking about a couple years out before we really started with substantial construction. IMCA project, this is one partially funded. You can see in the year past, we spent money for acquisition, spent money for design, and so there's been 3 years of money set aside for pay-as-you-go, and then we're showing some outstanding construction dollars that haven't been funded yet of about $2.1 million. That could be debt, again. It could be a short-term debt or other type of debt, but a bond is certainly an option there. We've got that listed as a future referendum. What we don't have listed on this one is, in particular, is the operating impacts. We have an agreement with the Y. They're maintaining and doing a lot of activity on the fields, and so we want to refine what our responsibilities are under that, but there likely will be some operating impacts added to this sheet over time. Town Creek Park, these are two or this is an item that's funded in this year's budget. Dina is taking Town Creek and Nesbit together, and we're showing the dollars that they were shown in the budget as 150, and then Nesbit was 300. So I'm gonna flip back and forth to those two projects. She's using an approach to try to bundle the two projects to get the maximum value in both those projects, so that they start to amount to something, close to $500,000, about $450,000. Makes it a little bit more attractive than just doing $100,000 worth of improvements in a park. And we might not get very good bids on that as a smaller project. So she's bundling those together and looking at both kits that come in for building structures and then stick-built options as well. So trying to maximize the value of these two projects. These both have the option of having some future phases. So Town Creek could have some structure and some playground. It does not, as you notice, list restrooms, because this budget number is not large enough for that. So that in the future could be something that a future board would decide they would want to include. Nesbit, the great news with it is it does include restrooms, picnic type structure, and some storage area, and a more substantial structure than we have in any park really right now. So that'll be a structure that'll fit in to our theme, our brand for the community, and she's working that project through. You'll see what is reflected in the bottom operating impacts is once you have a restroom facility, once you have picnic tables that are covered, and those are going to have to be maintained and maintained daily. Whoops, we skipped downtown park improvements. We've currently got this one still as a not funded, and we don't assign a value to this. There's been a lot of different estimates over the years depending on the scope of the project. And before we put a number up that had a expectation of this is the number for the park, we really need to go back and sit down and talk about what the scope entails downtown, because it's been a big number and it's scaled back a couple times, but the park and rec master plan update process really needs to go through that series of input, feedback from you, feedback from the public. Let Dina get some time under her belt here, understanding what's been envisioned there in the past, and then maybe what the approach would be as far as phasing it. But this one is one that we're working on to try to get some improved numbers and information on it, but it's definitely on the list to try to deliver as quickly as possible. Another project that we've added, I think from the last time you saw this draft, was public services facility. That acknowledges that that's an issue that we've got to address. We do have just a real rough penciled in number up at the top on this, because we don't have land that's been purchased, but if we have some dirt, it's going to be a fairly expensive proposition to get a new building built, new parking, fencing. So it's going to be a fairly substantial cost there. But we'll work on that. We're continuing to look at and evaluate sites. And again, if you have properties that you want us to take a look at, please let us know. But we do need to replace what we currently have, and that's acknowledged here. Waxhaw Parkway, Dennis has worked to give some dollar figure to how could you go about connecting the southwest Waxhaw Parkway over to make it a connection to Waxhaw Marvin Road, and make that a reality sooner than later. So this is trying to work not the full Waxhaw Parkway to the east side that we've looked at before, but a smaller, quicker connection to the west side that would be functional and would give some relief coming off 16, so you wouldn't have to bring all the traffic through the downtown. This one is a brand new project, trying to be as forward thinking as we can to get some relief sooner than later, because what many people don't understand, and it is hard to understand, is that these big road projects take 5 to 6 years in most cases to plan, design, acquire right-of-way, move utilities, and deal with any regulatory issues that come up. So we want to get something started as quickly as we can and then work through the process.
Point of clarity on the operating impact. I was just looking at Nesbit Park. Those are the actuals for the fiscal year. They're not cumulative.
Correct.
Okay.
Just going back to Waxhaw Parkway, to put a point on something I think will be discussed further, the Waxhaw Parkway East side is not a funded project. It is not a approved project, and there's not an approved final route for that. So if and when that ever gets successfully scored and moves forward, then that one could potentially move back as a CIP project, but it's not one currently. That also would be probably largely funded by others and not the towns, since it would be a state level project.
So in that same vein, would Highway 16 then come onto the CIP in some way as that becomes clear?
So Highway 16 would be largely a state project at
Right.
over $80 million. The part where the town might be a contributor to that project would be in whatever sidewalk or pedestrian accommodations are made, or changes to the cross-section that would actually make it wider than what the state would normally deliver. So, and that would,
That's when it would come on.
yeah, and just as a side note, we will be coming back to you in the near future, probably in the next month or so, to talk about Highway 16 cross-section and what the fiscal impacts of that might be, and the coordination with the other jurisdictions in the county and the county itself. So that's a conversation that will be happening fairly soon, because there needs to be direction and coordination on that cross-section.
Can I ask a question about the Waxhaw Parkway? Is it possible to phase the Waxhaw Parkway on the west side to connect to Waxhaw Marvin Road first and then to 75?
Yeah, that's kind of what this project is getting at, is to get the first connection made from the existing end of Waxhaw Parkway over to Waxhaw Marvin. The project that's not on the sheet is then getting a bridge over 75 back down to grade. That project is making some potential headway with one of the consent agenda items that's on tonight, an infra grant, which is a grant that the CRTPO is encouraging the state to fund, where there could be a potential bridge or grade separated structure somewhere in Waxhaw, and so that could either go east or west on the parkway alignment. So that might then potentially solve the west side, or it could solve the east side issue. But right now, the east side doesn't have a nice connection to get anywhere close. This is a little bit closer. Downtown streetscape, this just acknowledges that even though the TAP grant's going to do a lot of great things downtown, there is a limited scope and there's limited geography that it'll cover. And so there may be some additional downtown streetscape. There will be additional downtown streetscape to be desired as you get further away from the core main street, the two main streets. As you go north and south on some of the other streets, and they're listed there in the top box, there'd be some additional construction activity.
Does this include the streetlights that have been talked about?
The streetlights are going to be coordinated with the TAP grant
Right.
for the downtown area.
Were they on the TAP grant one? Or
They are actually a prior funded capital item that's been reserved and will be coordinated with the TAP grant. So they're not actually on the TAP grant sheet as a separate item, but they'll be coordinated.
okay. Thank you.
Same item with 34-acre park. Really, as we go through the update of the Park and Rec Master Plan, this will be something that will be talked about. What exactly is desired there? What's the estimated cost? How do we get to that point? And so this, as we move forward, we'll get a lot more detail as we get kind of some project scope to go along with it. It again could move up in its spot on the timing as well, depending on some feedback from you and looking at potentially funding sources. How do we pay for something there and go about making it useful. Kensington Road, I think we're about 70% plans. Dennis has a meeting to start looking at some of the detail and giving some feedback to the design firm on that project. But this project, again, is because of the scope, is multi-year, and will take some time also to fund. So we're going to have to figure out how to do that. So in conjunction with other projects, this one is in the timing for a few years out.
So that was one that had some funds from outside sources. St. Matt's, I think Landover. Those are sitting somewhere, or and they'll show up here when we get to that point.
Correct.
Yeah.
If they're going to be coordinated with this particular project. So for example, if the church decided to go ahead and build ahead of this schedule and they need to make their improvements separately, then that would be done.
Okay.
This is,
It's just hard to keep track of all these things that have been said in the past
so here's a town hall project for a future out year. This is just to acknowledge that we're in a rented facility in the current location that has been extended for a few more years, but we need to be thinking about what the ultimate plan is after that facility is too small for existing staff. This gives an option to look at construction of a new facility that would probably consolidate people, consolidate some locations. Some of our locations are going to change over time, so this acknowledges that if we have the opportunity to be in one facility or two facilities instead of multiple facilities, it's a better condition for public and for the staff to be able to be serviced in one building.
What did we extend the lease to?
We had a 2-year extension that we are working on proposing that go to 3 or 4 years. That's not finalized, but the 2-year extension's already been invoked. So this gives kind of a overview. There are 15 total capital projects in the program or plan. 8 start first year, 3, 2, 1, and 1. So that's kind of how they're staggered out. Guarantee you that will change over time as we make adjustments and we bring there'll be some additional, probably smaller capital projects that'll be added in 2 or 3 years out. Hopefully those will be things that we can make happen sooner than later. But this is kind of where we're at right now with a summary of the 15 that are proposed without 3. So that, look at the number there at the top, it's $17.5 million for the 12 that we have project cost. And acknowledging that the 3 that we don't have project cost on are very large. You got 34-acre park, the downtown park, and town hall. So if you think about what those might be, if they're several $1 million each for the parks and over $10 million for the town hall, you've got another 14, 15, $16 million that's kind of out there that we're working on defining. But when you add up the top 12 that we have right now, we're over $17.5 million. So that's getting to a number where structuring the timing and the type of debt, because you cannot do pay as you go with the current tax rate and the current funds. To make this an active program, we're going to have to talk about debt.
Questions?
Here are a couple questions that we will have of you. Are these projects that you want to include? So if there's a project on here you don't want to build, then we need to know that and not proceed forward with it. Are there other projects that we need to be thinking about building, particularly in the next 2 to 3 years, that we need to be planning and figuring out locations for now? Are there projects in the out years that you think we need to be thinking about as well? But really, the bottom line project of this, the bottom line of this plan is really to figure out how we pay for projects and to start giving some certainty to that over years, because we really do need to be in a position to structure our debt and structure the timing of our debt so that we can make it as affordable as possible and we can lower any tax implications as low as possible. And so that'd be part of the program would be look at, even though $17.5 million is a big number, all that debt would not come online at the same time. So you'd look at how to structure that over actually about a 7-year period. And that minimizes or decreases the tax impact. Any questions that we can answer this evening? We'll be happy to. If you have questions for follow-up, we'll be happy to get back to those as well.
Yeah, we probably need to spend some time on this, especially those 3 questions. The other question I have is, we have other capital expenses, vehicles, et cetera. Where do you pick those up?
So operating capital gets covered in the annual budget. So you'll see numbers for projects or for a piece of equipment. So a piece of equipment or a number of cars would be considered in the annual operating budget as operating capital. Those are generally smaller amounts.
Yep.
And we don't really have a policy that says, I don't believe we have a policy that defines what that operating capital is, but those are hundreds of thousands and less, not the larger capital real estate type projects where you're putting structures on dirt or you're improving roads. Those could be movable capital, so things that you can move around.
Any other questions?
Question. At the time that the board approved the leaf processing property, that was on, there was conversation about putting the public services out there. Why is that not possible now?
I think in reviewing what I've seen about the compost facility is there was some thought that it would need additional acreage, and that additional acreage really hadn't been acquired. And so the current facility, as I understand it, given the buffers and the fact that we've only operated it a short period of time, appears that it's going to take up most all of the space that's currently disturbed. So I think the question would be, if additional property is added to it, would that be a feasible location? But it's not in its current state because we need at least 5 acres for operations facility, and you really probably want to look at a larger acreage if possible for the long term. Probably a minimum of 5 if it's got good topography to get public services in a location that would give them 15 or 20 years of time.
And one last question. You mentioned a $10 million price tag for town hall. Where does that $10 million price tag come from?
Well, that's why we didn't put a number on that particular sheet. There's not a number that exists. It's just any number that's assigned to that project is going to be based on square footage and then what the going price is for the building industry at that time for square footage. So we did not assume that there's a particular square footage, although the slide says approximately 30,000 square feet. That's been a number that's been used in the past. It doesn't mean that that's the number that has to be used in the future, but really it comes down to what year it's constructed, because that's going to be the answer to the cost is going to be the construction cost at the time that it's bid and constructed. So if we were bidding it right now, the number would be incredibly scary because the construction industry is really at a premium right now. If it's constructed during a down economic time, the number might be a whole lot better from a planning standpoint. And frankly, that'd be the goal, would be to time a project like that so that you'd thought through the process, you'd acquired the land, you'd started doing design, you had a real true scope, and then ideally you would time it for a slowdown in the commercial construction activity.
I think the 2 examples that you had as baselines are the corner lot that I think was priced at, I think, upwards of 12 to 13 million, and then right across the street parking lot, when we looked at that, the property was plus build out was approaching 10 million. So those are the 2 box ends you had to look at.
Yeah, I think at one point we had, when this was the first draft to you, I think we had a single-digit million number on there, but
Yeah.
at the same time, we didn't want to err on the side of going too large or too small until there'd been some time to discuss the program of work for the building, and then really, as the mayor noted, the location's gonna dictate how much asphalt you need, how much sidewalk, utilities certainly, does it have water and sewer on site? All those things would need to be factored in.
Other questions? All right, I'll with that, entertain a motion to adjourn the work session.
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
See you in 20 minutes.